please ask her any questions you have. Hello, Raffaele. Good to see you. Hello, Elisa. Hello, Pamela. So yesterday we talked about grounds. So I'm just going to take about 10 minutes to recap really quickly. And the grounds come in 6 colors and 2 sizes. They come in a 16-ounce size, and they come in a 4-ounce size. And they're available in iridescent gold. They're available in pearlescent, titanium white, the buff titanium, transparent, and Mars black. So they are archival, which means if you put it on top of a cardboard which has lignin, for example, or a wood which has lignin, which can tend to yellow, it will act as a barrier. So that won't be able to come through the substrate. Won't be able to come through the watercolor ground. So it's archival. Yesterday, what we did is I put the gold. So you see the iridescent gold right here. It's just 1 coat. You can put more than 1 coat if you wanted to. This is the titanium white, the buff, the black, and this down here, if I move it around, you can see kind of shimmer. That is the shimmer. And that's on top of a piece of wood. What I also did is tint. You can tint a color. You can use up to 20% acrylic to tint, or 10% by weight watercolor. This is with watercolor. And this is with the titanium, the iridescent ground. You can kind of see that it's shiny. So it does work with the iridescent. You can actually tint with the iridescent. And then this is just a green that I made. This is with acrylic, 20% acrylic. And this right here has been covered with the transparent watercolor ground. So this is now a paintable surface. I can paint on top of that because it's covered with the transparent ground. This is what the tinted looks like. This is tinted titanium over a can. So now that's a paintable surface. And this is it over plastic. 1 coat. You could put another coat. You want about 5 mil thickness, is probably not more than that. So this is a single coat. If that worked for you, you'd stop there. Otherwise, you could actually add another coat. Hello, Rajat. Let me close that so I can see you guys. Hello, Chantal from Rotterdam. One thing I wanted to show you before we go to Carolyn. We talk about different binders. So this is watercolor. This is lapis watercolor. It's a very heavy pigment. So lapis watercolor. And now without rooting my brush, this is lapis and oil. This actually will look blue. The watercolor will look much bluer while it's wet, and when it dries, it'll look lighter because the water will evaporate. But now if we look at the, oh, I should put that into water, which I should have done. Let's look at the oil. Normally in oil, you have a linseed This is actually a safflower oil. When you have whites or you have lights, you use safflower oil because linseed oil can yellow over time. So the way you get rid of that is just use a different binder. This brush is sucking it. This little foam thing is sucking it up. I just wanted to show you the difference. There's roughly the same amount of pigment in both. What happens, however, this is because it's in a linseed, when light hits it, it bounces differently, so it looks darker, but it's actually about the same amount of pigment. So when you're using a watercolor, once you have the evaporation, you're really looking at what the pigment looks like. This will stay dark, and that's just because it's a different binder. So I want to see that. And with that, I'd like to bring Caroline on.
Hey, everybody. Hi.
Yes, Colin, it is. Lapses are really neat color.
Hi, live, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Let's see. Caroline, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Can't hear me? Oh, somebody's got a telephone call.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Yes.
Yes, we hear you, John. We hear you both.
Yes, we can hear you, John.
I can hear you both.
Okay. Let's see. Angela, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear Caroline?
Yes. And I can hear Angela.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, I can hear you clearly, all of you.
Now I can hear you.
And I can hear Angela.
Okay.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
You cannot hear me because I'm translating and it would cause
Now I can hear you.
an echo.
Okay.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
You cannot hear me because I'm translating and it would cause
Now I can hear you.
an echo.
Okay.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
You cannot hear me because I'm translating and it would cause.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
You cannot hear me because I'm translating and it would cause.
Okay, let's figure out
Caroline, can you hear me
someone's.
now?
Okay, someone's
No,
iPad. Let me figure out who needs to mute because there's an echo. Okay. And Caroline is here. Okay, John, we can check audio is good. I'm gonna release Caroline's.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, just give me a moment. Okay, John, we can check audio is good. I'm gonna release Caroline's.
So Caroline's iPad I have there, now it's back on.
Okay.
And now I hear her.
You can hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay.
Caroline's iPad I have there, now it's back on. So I hear myself echo. What I'm gonna do, Caroline, is I'm going to just introduce you and then I'm gonna go off and that way they won't hear echoes. So everybody, this is Carolyn and she's from Australia. Wonderful artist. She's going to talk about today how to use watercolor ground. She's going to talk about other things as well. Please, if you have questions, Carolyn's a practicing artist. She can answer many of the questions you have about watercolor ground and other things. So please ask her. She's great. She's up really early in the morning doing this, so thank you for doing this. And with that, I'm going to, Carolyn, ask you to take over. She's great. She's up really early in the morning doing this.
So hello, everybody around the world. I'm really, really honoured to be invited to share some tips with you all today. I've, really fallen in love with the watercolour world, and in my exploration came up with some ideas of how I was going to do something really groovy and use watercolour on other surfaces, and went on a journey of discovery, and I found the watercolour ground, and the Daniel Smith became my favourite to use, and I've just gone from strength to strength using it in many ways. for the last, I think, 3 years. So maybe I was one of the early users of it because it's quite a new product in the world market. However, it has, you know, initially takes some time to understand it. There's some important features about it that you have to recognise. You have to make sure that you put it on a surface that has what we call tooth. Maybe you need to sand it lightly if it's wood or glass or plastic. If it is canvas, possibly need to prime your canvas with anything as simple as an acrylic gesso, and then put your primer on, and that enables your surface to bond really well with the watercolour ground. So what I've done is I've done all sorts of samples to try and show you some great information today. But the first thing, I know John just introduced you to the colours, but I too have done a selection of colours for you. So the iridescent gold, you can see, it has a beautiful shimmer to it. And this is actually only one coat. I have found that as long as you're generous with the first coat, you don't necessarily need a second coat. But occasionally, depending on if that surface is going to be exposed in your painting, you may want it to be more particular and not have light and dark spots. And then you may choose to do a second or even a third coat. But as you learn about the watercolour, there's Mars Black. It's absolutely jet black. It's really, really matte. It's got no light that shimmers from it, which is a really interesting surface to learn how to use. Black was quite a challenge for me initially. The titanium buff, that's great for people sort of looking for maybe a base to start their portrait work with. Maybe people that like to do organic flower work in gardens and things like that, just to have that lovely neutral tone and not have the harsh white of paper. So that's a great one to have. The pearlescent, which again is another one that's sort of a bit fun to use. Can you see the pearl shimmer on that paper? It again is quite interesting, and depending on how much colour you put on it is how much shimmer you see through. As we know how transparent watercolour is, well, all the mica shimmering through will actually shimmer through the layers of your watercolour. And this one being the titanium white, I thought I'd sort of trick it up a little bit by trying to, can you see I've actually put it on really thick in some spots and created a textured surface. So it's dried like that. So now any watercolour painting I have would actually have a little bit of 3D to the paper. That was the basics of sort of getting to know. I haven't done a sample sheet of clear for you because I've actually done a beautiful sample of a piece of art using the transparent watercolour ground. But there was a question asked yesterday about, can you mix the ground with pure pigments? So being an artist, I like to dabble and explore lots of ways to expand my knowledge of using the grounds. And so I did get myself some pigments and had a play with how to mix colours. So any colour, this particular one is Queen Red that I've mixed with titanium white. And you can see, it, obviously, because it's a white base, will always give you a pink or a pastel tone. So wherever you mix with the white. Again, the burnt umber, you've got a pastel look to that paper because of the white that you've mixed it with. But it's a lovely neutral tone that you can achieve, and a little bit like a oil painter may paint their whole canvas a colour and then bring forward their artwork from that colour, and often then rely on not having to fill every gap on your paper because this colour will come through and form a part of those gaps, which makes it interesting. I thought it'd be fun to try the iridescent gold mixed with an olive green. See that lovely shimmer that I can achieve on the paper, and it almost looks like velvet in real life. It's a bit hard to tell on a video screen. I suppose this lovely flat surface, but it's all the glow that the iridescent and the pearlescent mica in that actually offers that. But taking it a little bit further, I thought a lot of people ask questions like, well, why and when would you use the ground? Sometimes people are interested in actually creating texture in their artwork. And so I've just used a little bit of the buff here, and the paper actually has textured ribs in it from using the watercolor ground on the paper. So now if I continue to paint an artwork on that, I would have that texture come through onto my artwork. I've got a couple of artworks in front of me that I'm going to show you that use that example. So this is one artwork. And so you can see possibly there's different textures that are coming through on the picture from allowing the ground to have a little bit of texture to start with. And using the black watercolor ground, you'll see the beautiful, I think we've got antique bronze at the bottom here, and scarab is our red that's here. And we have it's a titanium mixed with a little bit of Naples to make a really soft cream going on in here. But the actual paint picture itself was started on a ground of black with these two gold squares. So you can see the whole picture. You can actually start the base to keep this light in the gold by actually using the ground as a part of your picture. It's quite interesting to do that. I thought also it was interesting to see people that like to do collage work. You might be able to see that I've collaged some Japanese origami paper onto my watercolor paper. And this is an incomplete work. This is just a beginning stage. But over the sumi paper, I've actually added the titanium watercolor ground ready to actually paint this floral little pot of orchids. So that enables you to do collaging in the background and putting watercolor ground in the foreground to then continue your watercolor artwork. Interesting concept. The picture I was showing you before, this is just ground. So this is the base of what I would actually put together to create some interesting abstract artwork. And you may like to see that I've actually also added a three-dimensional medium of impasto there to actually give 3 dimension on the actual paper. And then I've put the ground over the top so I can now paint with the watercolor on that surface as if it's a clean piece of paper, but now it's actually got light and dark and shadow. It's got the shimmer of the gold. I've scratched into the wet ground when I first put it down. So I can actually make interesting textures when I'm laying my ground down. And you can, really be quite imaginative about how to use the grounds to your advantage when you've had a little bit of a play with them. So from there, I've had a lot of fun over the time putting watercolor ground onto things like a glass surface. So this is my limoncello. It's nearly all gone because it was so nice, I have to say. But to label the bottle, I placed watercolor ground and then painted a watercolor picture. And then I've sealed that watercolor picture with a sealant. And in this case, I used Mod Podge because it's waterproof, watertight. And when my bottle's empty, I can take it to the sink and I can give it a good rinse and not upset the watercolor painting that's on the ground there. So it's sealed into the glass basically. And if I get sick of it, I want to relabel it, I just put a new coat of watercolor ground over the top of that and make a new picture. So from season to season, I could change the flavour of my limoncello. Maybe next year I'll have kumquat or mandarin or something like that. So I can change the detail there. I've also taken to collecting simple plain white vessels. I love recycling. I think we can look after our earth so much better if you actually start thinking about recycling things. So I collect simple white vessels, and sometimes they're coloured too. They're just a really nice shape. And from a simple white vessel, I then use watercolour ground onto the vessel and paint it, and then I can actually paint a picture on the vessel. So it's like a three-dimensional artwork. You don't always need a frame. Don't always need a picture hanging on the wall. You can have a picture on a vessel instead. So it's something quite different. And I think people that like their ceramics but have got into their paintings is another way of sort of exploring your ceramic art and decorative vessels by using a watercolour ground on perhaps even some of your own handmade vessels that you've made. Just quite fun.
Caroline, we have a question here from Claudia. What material do you use to seal the watercolor ground? That's first. And second is, what is the protecting layer? That's from
okay. Sure. I've got two products here. I'm just going to grab them and I'll show you. So I use, depending on the vessel, depending on what I'm using the vessel for. If I'm using just a canvas or perhaps a picture for a wall, I've been using a cold wax varnish. This particular one is Languages. It's not a preference brand to me. It's just what's available in my town. And I know I need to seal the watercolor because it's porous and any moisture will affect it. So I need to put a coating of some sort to protect it. So that's one way of protecting it. The little vessel that I used that I would want to take and rewash, if I have to wash the contents from, I need to seal it really well. And something like a Mod Podge is designed for crafters and they use it to seal things. So I find this is a good product to use for that. And then occasionally I'll even use a matte varnish. So depending on the product, depending on the artwork, I'll definitely look for a solution and a solution that suits what I'm actually achieving. So there's three different ones that you can seal them with. And I think that answers both those questions. Pretty sure. So I move along a little bit. I'll show you another artwork. What's interesting about this artwork is the top half of the paper was painted in the Mars black and the bottom in the titanium white. And then I also gave the whole page a layer of the pearlescent ground, which has given a real shimmer to the rocks. It's almost like they are silver, just because of the pearlescent look to them. But it did allow, when I put the darker watercolour up here through to the light, that I was able to get that transfer of light and dark in my picture, because I actually started my actual ground with the light and dark in the background as a layer. So when I first came across the watercolour grounds, I was just really interested in being able to paint on a canvas. I wanted to be able to grab a canvas like I used to with my acrylics, paint a beautiful watercolour and seal it and not have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for framing and hang it on my wall, and that would be a great solution. And as I've grown with my art, I've learnt that there's issues with posting glass. My marketing agents don't allow glass, they don't insure glass. So I was sort of forced to find other solutions to doing artwork that I presented well, that didn't need glass, that would travel around the world or around Australia to different clients that bought my work. And so the watercolour ground on canvas became a really, really good solution for me. So I think I've taken that in very, very, really diverse directions in trialing it in different ways. So what I've got set up around my room here today is a whole lot of different artworks to show you, and the different ways that I've used it. So I'll just grab a bit at a time, or we'll have a talk about it. So this artwork, if I can get it in there, the watercolour picture itself of the rocks was painted on a plain watercolour 300 GSM Arches paper. And as I developed that picture, I decided I really wanted to put a boat in the picture. And so what I did was, when I finished on my rock work, I then added this layer and this shape of the boat in a watercolour ground and reclaimed the white area of my paper. So the same method could be used for repairing something that has maybe a mistake you've made, or a change you want to make in a picture. I've done it as a solution to actually developing a more interesting layer in my artwork. And it makes my boat feel like it's floating on the water. So quite pleased with how that one's turned out. That one's been a finalist in a few different exhibitions, this particular painting. So it's been sort of, had quite a bit of interest taken in it because it looks so different to what you normally see with watercolour work. What else have we got? So recently I had an exhibition. You can see that this is actually a canvas that's actually been sandwiched between two pieces of Perspex. So I've actually put a watercolour base on the canvas. It's a flat piece, it's not stretched, it's not in a wood mount, just a plain piece of canvas with the watercolour ground over the surface. And then I've painted my beautiful picture of my Madonna. And I've also embellished her with gold foil. So she has some interesting features to her, but ultimately it's watercolour on canvas and then framed in a floating mount of Perspex. That's a little bit different to sort of see that happen. Okay, what else have we got? Okay. So all around the world, lots of artists are using these cradle boards, the birch boards, and I too have used them quite often with different artworks. So to paint straight onto the timber, you'll find that the watercolour would just seep in and you get a really pale, almost colourless version of your watercolours, because the wood itself absorbs the colour. But putting a surface of ground, so that's a white titanium ground, first, you then are really just treating it as if it's a piece of paper. I think a tip I can say for the watercolour ground is it's not totally and exactly like paper, but it actually adheres to many of the qualities of paper. You can get your lovely sharp lines. You can do your wet in wet areas. You can do a dry brushing, effect in different areas. I think I've got a bit of dry brushing up here in this one. You can get your granulation with your Primatex. So all of the things that you would expect to be able to get on a paper, you can get when painting on the ground. The biggest difference is it's a lot slower to dry, and you don't do so much, you don't like wet the whole page first to paint. You're basically just painting on with a wet solution of your pigment colour on your brush, because the ground itself, it stays moist, but you want to be able to control that moisture level. And if you just put lots and lots of water on it, it takes too long to dry. So I suggest just painting colour by colour and paint your picture directly on. And I know some artists paint in this method like I do, and other artists actually work with the, paint your water and slowly bring your colour down your page, and you do your underground washes and your layers over. So we all have slightly different methods, but I find that ground, it's a good method to paint your picture straight on first. This particular picture, it's all watercolour except for the blue sky, and the blue sky is actually a gouache. So I've created that really solid background sky by using a gouache next to the watercolour. The next one is watercolour on canvas. So it's a cradle canvas. You can see we all use canvases. It's a stretched canvas, and it's really glossy because it's been finished with a 2-pack polyurethane pour. So like the resin artists that have become quite popular around, you can buy a product which is a two-part clear, and that's actually been treated with that. So it's almost like 70 layers of glass over the top, and it's lovely and shiny, and it's quite interesting. And it was interesting, I experimented with this one, and I was really impressed with how the 2-pack worked over the watercolour, because it still have those lovely qualities of the transparencies of watercolour, but with that glass sealant over it. So the watercolour is really protected by the polyurethane. So something different again. There's so many different ways you can use it. It's just so exciting. I'm thinking I'm going to take you for a wander around the room, because a lot of the other works are a lot bigger, and they're going to be more difficult for me to bring to the screen. So I think we might turn over to somebody else temporarily while I get my camera ready to go for a wander. How does that sound?
Sure, we can have John, and we can put everyone on the gallery view.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
So those have been wonderful examples. So interesting to see how Caroline uses the ground, because I'm asked so often, how do you protect it? And Caroline shared that, or do you need glass? And that polyurethane seems like it's an excellent thing. So lots of really nice ideas. So if you have questions, please ask Caroline directly. I see some of those being asked on Facebook and here on the Zoom, but you can also talk to her directly.
Okay, I'm ready to go when you are.
So Gabriel has a question.
I'm not familiar, but is there some type of like a wax sealant? And have you tried that on the ground?
Yes, there's definitely a wax sealant. And sorry, I'm going to turn this camera around so you can see me. Okay, so yes, there's a wax sealant. I can show you. I was showing the others before. The one that I'm using at the moment is, can I get that into screen? I've been using Languages. It's basically almost like a face cream. It goes on like a Vaseline, and you rub it on and it sets, and then you polish it. And you can polish it as dull or as highly polished as you want, depending on the finish you want for your art. But it definitely seals the watercolor, which is really, really important that you seal the watercolor. But yeah, there's other methods. You can use a spray can of, either matte varnish, or you can, if you paint any liquid onto watercolor, you move the watercolor. I find the wax doesn't move the pigment at all. Urethane hasn't moved the pigment. But I'm trying to paint something like a clear varnish or a Mod Podge or something like that actually will dilute and move the pigment out of your painting. So you've really got to test a few different things to make sure that you don't damage your beautiful painting by the sealant you're putting on it, because that would be really disappointing. Also acknowledging once you've sealed it, you can't unseal it with watercolor. I think even a conservationist would tell you that there's certain types of things you can seal and in different ways, but with watercolor, they can't clean that sealant off to get down to the layer that they would like they would do with an oil painting. It's once it's sealed permanently. However, you can always ground your picture again and start again. So nothing's to stop you from not reusing your canvas or your board or whatever you've put it on. I haven't tried it outside. I haven't had any artworks left outside for any time with the sealant on it yet. That's something else I'm yet to do. So I can't give you any sort of expectation in weather for that sort of thing. But it's something that I will test in time and give me a better idea of, has it got a 1 year or a 5 year or a 10 year lifespan when it's actually exposed to the elements. That's something that I don't know that anybody's really trying at the moment, but I'm always interested because I love exploring. It's something fun. Anyway, I've got a few others to show you, and I'll tell you as I show you what sealants are on each one. Okay. So this one was what you would see on my Daniel Smith blog. This is the artwork that I created for that blog, and there's a full explanation of how I created it. And you will see that this one has got a really matte finish, apart from the pearlescence, of course, but the matte finish is because I used the cold wax polish. And that's why I liked it so much, because it left that pure softness that a watercolor is by having a matte finish instead of a glossy finish. And the wax was the first, out of trialing lots of things, that was the first thing that I came across that gave that real rawness and freshness to the watercolor painting itself. So I did like that. The next group of artworks are black ground. They have watercolor and gouache and gold foil. And you'll see that that's a classic canvas that's been treated, I'll get it in the right screen, sorry, treated with the black ground. And you'll see that the black ground is actually even a part of the actual paint of the painting. You can see where I've missed and exposed the black ground in the actual artwork. And so it becomes a part of the art, not just the background, which I find quite fascinating. So these are works that are about to go into an exhibition that I'm having. So you get a sneak peek tonight. I don't know how many people are going to drop into Canberra to see my exhibition, so it's pretty safe to give you a sneak peek around the world in this one. So they're a little bit different. And that's the ground. That's how wonderful is the ground, to be able to do that on canvas with watercolour. Just absolutely brilliant. So we'll take you for a wander further down the room and we'll look at something really unique that I've only done today. So today we had an inquiry, or yesterday I should say, we had an inquiry about can you paint on glass and make it feel like it's a glass window. And look what I've done. So I haven't peeled the edges yet. You can see it's still got the edge of the Perspex coating on it. And I've used a silver foil and I've used a clear, transparent watercolour ground on the Perspex and then painted the watercolour itself straight onto the ground, and then presenting it, I felt that it looked amazing when I turned it over. And so I have the feeling of a stained glass window with watercolour. And I don't think I've seen one of them anywhere yet. This might be the first one, which would be a nice thing to share with all the Daniel Smith enthusiasts. That's pretty cool. You'll see the work that inspired me was, of course, a Charles Rennie Mackintosh. I thought people would actually, like his work, and it'd be a nice thing to make a stained glass window out of. So something a little bit different. So the other thing I've got over here is 2 boards. So you'll see that they're cradled boards. You'll see they're a classic cradled board, and hopefully I won't tip them over. So you covered the camera there. You can see one has a gloss polyurethane finish. See the gloss that's on it? And the other has a wax finish, and it's absolutely matte as. There's no gloss, it's just flat and matte, and they're so different from each other, and they give a completely different feel to the finish of the artwork by simply having the different sealants on the actual artwork itself. And then one more I've got over here, or 2 more I should say. I'm working on a series of large rock work, and this is painted directly onto a white titanium gesso board. And this one hasn't been sealed yet because I haven't finished the series. And this is how the raw watercolor actually looks, and the color, how much color you can actually achieve putting the watercolor onto white ground. So you can get quite richness with the colors. And you'll see there's lots of granulation in this one because it's all my favorite Chromatex in that particular piece, which is pretty cool. And then this last one over here is interesting because this was an artwork I didn't like. And I painted it directly onto the watercolor ground, directly onto the Perspex. And it had a picture that I hated. So the other day in one of my workshops, I said to my students, you know what? I wonder how well that had cleaned, because I hadn't sealed it yet. So I took it over to the sink and scrubbed it clean and had a new white page to paint on again. I thought that was a really, really interesting thing you could do, is to reclaim an artwork back to its original white paper as such, and go again and create and paint a new picture on it. So there's quite an interesting, diverse way that I've used all the watercolors. But what I'm going to do, apart from putting you back on the cradle over here, is get somebody to flip it and share the screen with everybody while I muck around with getting it back in its cradle. How does that sound?
Sounds
okay.
Great.
Thank you. Right, must be ready for some questions by now. The question was, is it plexiglass? Yes, it is plexiglass that I'm using. I go to a sign writer locally and I have the pieces cut to suit my artwork. And sometimes I sandwich the artwork between 2 pieces of Perspex, and other times I just seal the Perspex depending on the presentation and what I want to do with the actual artwork itself.
There's a question here from Claudia. How are the watercolors affected with varnishes?
I find you need to either spray it on or give a light matte spray if you're going to brush it on, because it will move the watercolor itself if you add too much moisture. So with I use this matte varnish before I would use a brush with Mod Podge. So that would give it a temporary seal, just a really light coat of that, and then the Mod Podge, and that would actually then seal it. But the Mod Podge gives a glossiness to it, which not everybody likes. I think you can buy that in a matte finish as well. That's one way of sealing it. The wax varnish, it's almost like a face cream. So you actually scoop it out and you rub it on your work, and it doesn't move any of the watercolor pigment at all. And it goes on as a soft cream, and it dries and becomes transparent, and then you give it a soft polish. And I just use a cotton cloth and basically polish like you would do with a piece of furniture, if you're wax sealing a piece of furniture. And I find that it's nice and matte and flat, and it really enhances the beautiful color of the watercolor without putting that glossy shine that that the polyurethane or perhaps a gloss varnish might do. So this has been one of my favorites out of all the things that I've been sealing my work with. John's going to have to come up with a wax polish for us now, isn't he?
I like that.
There's one more question here from Cheryl. How do you wire the plexiglass to hang the art?
Okay. I can show you that. So,
and
you can buy this.
And just before that, Caroline, there's actually another question. What was the silver material you used on the glass for stained glass effect?
It was just a silver foil, an artist's foil, like a gold foil, but a silver. And I would use size, like a gilding size to glue the area. I'm just taking out this joint so I can show you. Okay. So the artwork has holes drilled in it, and you have this little item here, which you screw onto the wall. Can you see the hole in that? So you drop a screw down through here and screw that to the wall, and then these two pieces screw together, and so you hang it on the wall with what we call a wall mount. It's a wall standoff or a wall mount. And there's not a lot in a typical art store you would see of that, but if you speak to a framing store or you speak to people that hang glass mirrors, the glass mirror people use this sort of product, and it's been really successful. And my last exhibition, I had my work hanging by this. All the artists in the whole building all come into the studio and went, oh my gosh, look at that. That's really unique. That's really different. So it's really new in the market, and not many artists are using it, but it's a really interesting way of presenting your artwork with minimal wires and hanging things. But you do have to drill a hole into the wall to use that product. Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I think that answers the question.
Fantastic.
Okay. So Caroline, thank you so much. Your artwork and your examples are absolutely wonderful. They're really, really wonderful. And we will post your site on Facebook. Everybody, please go to Carolyn's website. Can you tell us just verbally what your website is so that the viewers can hear it?
I can. It's carolinedeeble.com. Really simple, but I'll tell the world the truth. It needs to be updated. All of these new works aren't on it because they're waiting for an exhibition, and I don't release my work before exhibition.
Oh, sure. That makes absolute sense. But the insights you gave were fantastic. A lot of the questions the viewers were talking about yesterday, I said, well, Carolyn will talk about that from a practical sense, and you did that and like 500% more than that. So beautiful, beautiful examples. Beautiful examples.
I have my list. I had my list of questions from you, and I was able to pick every single one of them off by this artwork.
Oh, fantastic! I like how you use the ground itself in your paintings by not painting over it. And what I saw as well, which was really interesting, on several of your paintings, you scratched so you could see the undertone of the color, which I thought was also really interesting.
Yeah, so it's another art product. It's another layer in my artwork.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to thank you for your time. I know it's quite early in Australia, so you're a real sport.
It's nearly 4:30 a.m.
Oh my gosh. And you're
Gina,
full of
oh, no,
energy.
for you. Just as well, I love Daniel Smith for products, hey?
So thank you, and thank you everybody for joining. Ethel, can we do a spotlight with Carolyn and do just a quick shot?
Sure, just for spotlight. Okay, hang on.
So all the viewers can also.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you
are
everyone
so welcome.
for joining me. How exciting. I was so thrilled to be invited.
So please go to Carolyn's website if you have questions. She's phenomenal about answering questions. And thank you so much.
Send me a Facebook message. I'm good at that.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I wish you a great Friday if that happens to be where you're at. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Carolyn,
Wonderful.
thank you. Special thank you to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you on Friday.
Bye.